Welcome everyone to the latest edition of StateScoop's Government Technology Webinar Series, sponsored today by ViON. I'm your host, Jake Williams, StateScoop's Manager of Strategic Initiatives. Today we take a look at smart integration for faster innovation, and we'll explore how state agencies are speeding up innovation and improving results despite budget and talent constraints by applying the lessons of smart IT integration. Joining us today are a few state IT thought leaders who've tackled some of these issues and have agreed to share some of the key lessons they have learned. I'm pleased to welcome Stu Davis. He's the Chief Information Officer for Ohio. In Ohio, Stu has spearheaded some very cool work to optimize the way the state's IT department delivers services. Welcome, Stu, and thanks for joining us today.
It's good to be here. Thank you for asking.
Also joining us today is Dewand Neely. He's the Chief Information Officer in Indiana. Dewand was appointed last year and has since hit the ground running, getting all kinds of great work done in that state. Welcome to the program, Dewand. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jake. Glad to be here.
And finally, we have Tony Encinias. He's the Vice President of Public Sector Strategy for ViON. Tony joined the company in April 2015 after a successful and impressive tenure as the CIO of Pennsylvania. Tony, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Jake. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. I also want to welcome our audience, including those joining us live today, as well as those tuning into the archived on-demand edition of this program. And, of course, would like to thank ViON for sponsoring our program today. Before we begin, I'd like to help our audience get familiar with our console and how they can participate. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any questions for our presenters during the webcast, you can click on the Q&A widget at the bottom and submit your question. We'll try to answer as many of those as possible during the live webcast, either during the presentations or toward the end of the program. A copy of today's slide deck will be available in the resource list widget. That looks like a green folder at the bottom of your screen. You can expand your slide area by clicking on the maximize icon on the top right of the slide area, or by dragging the bottom right corner of the slide area. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical issues. And finally, an on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately 1 day after our broadcast today for up to 90 days. It can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. So if you have any colleagues who might benefit from today's presentations, feel free to share your link with them. And with all that out of the way, let's get started. Stu, you've been working on ways to improve how your organization deals with optimizing your state's IT systems. Tell us about your experience and a few of the big takeaways you've learned from optimizing for faster innovation.
Well, sure, I can do that. We talked about migration to optimal service platforms. We kind of jokingly refer to it as smart as a service, but we figured that'd get us in a little bit of trouble. If you think about sort of the journey that the state of Ohio has been on, prior to 2010, we were very siloed in that regard. We had 120 really semi-autonomous agencies, boards, and commissions. We had about 9,000 servers that we knew were out there in that sprawl. We had 32-plus data centers, a variety of different security postures across the boards, and a core IT operating spend that was going from about $550 million to about $700 million in a very short period of time. And we knew we needed to get our arms around that. We had, of the cabinet agencies, of which there are 26, we had about 70% of the IT spend was really focused on IT operations and infrastructure. We knew we had to flip that. We knew we had to change that to something more in line with 30% on IT operations and infrastructure and 70% on the things that matter. The application focus is really where we wanted to go, and that's kind of what we started in 2011 to sort of really discuss with the agencies and get them on board with what we were talking about doing. And of course, we want them to invest on the application side because the applications is where the benefit goes back to the citizens or the businesses in Ohio. So that was really kind of a key thing. We also knew that we had two real strong strategic assets for the state of Ohio. We had the State of Ohio Computing Center, which at the time and probably still is one of the top 10 largest single building data centers in the country. And we had ORNet, which is a high-speed network, research network, really coming out of the university environment. It's 100 gig, which is sort of a heck of a backbone for the state of Ohio to work on. So it was really beneficial in that regard. Now, the problem with our data center was that we had really a data center condominium. We had probably 16 agencies in there, but they all had their own suite. And the data center in the late 80s was designed really more or less for large open spaces, and we started to put walls in to create those suites and really reduce the efficiency of the building. So we spent a little bit of time in, I guess it was early 2013, to really start to work on getting the data center up to snuff and getting it really to a Tier 3 data center as we went forward, and really begin to focus on really what we were talking about in the way of IT optimization and where we really wanted to go. Currently, we're about 50-50 on that spending split right now, so we still have a little bit more to go. That last 20% will be difficult, but really sort of where we're headed was really to begin focusing on those applications and creating a much better user experience for the citizens and the businesses that have to deal with the state and interact with the state. So we wanted to improve that and certainly make it easier to consume services, but also to discover the services that we provide. And we also recognize that in our world, things are changing very quickly, but we need to think mobile when we start to look at legacy systems and to get out of those particular platforms that we've been in for a long time. And if you look at this sort of the strategic objective number one, it was really about getting the agency CIOs, of which there are 26 different agency CIOs that do not necessarily report to me as the state CIO, but we want them to get engaged with the conceptual development of business transformation and business applications at the agency. It's important that IT is seen and continues to be seen as an enabler of innovation, and that's really what we're trying to sort of get the agencies to move in that direction. And by the same token, we want to be able to do that same kind of approach with our state employees to make sure that we're providing them the appropriate services and benefits and make it easier for them to do business with the state if you so inclined to look at it that way. And also to leverage the data that we have. We have a very rich data set, but it's very difficult to get to, very siloed, and where the data is, trying to figure out what data would be beneficial that might be in another agency makes it very difficult. So we want to streamline that process and really sort of begin to focus on data as a state asset and not so much an individual division or department asset. And of course, simplifying that sign-on was and continues to be sort of one of our focuses in that regard as well. And then last but not least, it's all about risk mitigation, right? It's about the security and making sure that we're investing in the security. We do take that very seriously. We want to make sure that our solutions are secure, reliable, and of course we always look to the cloud first and pretty much whatever we're doing. We want to make sure that the agencies are focused on those public-facing applications, and we want to streamline that process. And if you look at sort of the journey or the evolution that we've seen over really the last 15, 16 years, in the 1990s to 2000, it was all customized software. If you look at some of those legacy systems, those are all kind of designed and built from scratch. We kind of spent a lot of time doing that. We spend a lot more time now maintaining them and keeping them up and operational. We kind of grew into this, okay, well, let's look at COTS, let's look at commercial off-the-shelf type software and customize limited as best we could, at least not too much, but we weren't very good at that, very successful at that, to where we are today, which is really that emerging service platform and looking at things as a service as opposed to trying to build things from our own perspective, making sure that we have the industry's perspective, leveraging the industry because they probably have done some of these things before and they know how to do them, making sure that mobility is not an afterthought but is sort of baked into that process. And that's kind of where we are in the state of Ohio. We kind of looked at sort of the elements that we kind of thought were best done from a central perspective. And you can see that list there, the data center facilities and services, infrastructure services, internet access, hosting, and of course our enterprise resource planning, HR, financial and procurement, our timekeeping component, document management, business intelligence, and data warehousing and GIS. The one that I would say on here that is a little bit specific to DAS is a desk point and endpoint. That is not a centrally run service. I feel pretty strongly, especially from a help desk perspective, that the director of an agency needs to be able to grab the lapels of somebody who works for him to make sure that their PC is working and all of those kind of things are getting addressed. But that doesn't minimize the centrally looking component of security and some of those pieces and parts that we need to have in place to ensure the security of the state is protected. So the other thing that we're seeing now is sort of these emerging central services like database as a service. We have disaster recovery as a service. Security certainly has been centralized, and we're looking at sort of that central service for monitoring and response. Project portfolio management continues to be a big issue with the large projects that some of the agencies have, making sure that we're looking at our business partners from a portfolio perspective. And then others that just lend themselves to, as a provider, sort of an external provider or platform like email, SharePoint, those types of activities. I think probably the one on this list that was one of the early ones that we went to a hosted solution was on voice over IP, and that was simply because we're not a telephone agency. The agencies are not in the telephone business. Let's get somebody in the telecom industry who knows what they're doing and can think about that. And we've gone from virtually everything, 24,000, I think, on Centrex to about 30,000 folks on voice over IP today. So, I mean, you get the gist. I think what we're seeing now in the marketplace is a little bit more focused on data analytics as a service. I think security, network security, firewall, load balancing, all those kind of things are things that we're debating right now on if they're external or internal. Penetration testing, and of course remediation is something that external help is going to be required. And God forbid that were to happen, but we want to be prepared for that. And then as we go through, looking at testing as a service and some of those other components that I think lend themselves well to what we're trying to accomplish. And what we've done here in Ohio is really looked at those as a service thing, but it's sort of the services that the Office of Information Technology provides. So those data center services, the managed infrastructure layer that we provide to the agencies, the platform services, virtualization, VMware, all of those kind of things that help us manage the environments from a control perspective, of patch management, and so forth and so on. And then the managed security practice, which is really starting to grow. We're right now pursuing an effort called Trust Ohio that I think will get us well along the way of filling out the rest of this particular cloud, if you will. And then if you start to look at sort of where we've leveraged state and external cloud components, I mean, it's kind of a mix where we have some things that are in the public cloud, we have some things that are in the state cloud, but we also have hybrid approaches where we get to a point where it's consuming something from a public cloud, but it's actually coming through the state cloud. From our enterprise service bus that we've developed, the database as a service that we have, GIS in particular, a very strong point for the state. We're very focused on GIS here and the ability for us to leverage location as a key indicator. Payment services, you name it, you can see them all here. You see our ERP from an enterprise perspective is out there. IT service management is a cloud solution. We right now are working on the Ohio Business Gateway, which is really a business one-stop for the state of Ohio. Is going through its next evolution, so we're going from Ohio Business Gateway 2 to 3.0. We're looking at grants management as also a hybrid sort of approach. We have document management, and e-signature is coming on here very soon. We're growing out the voice over IP piece to begin to look at video conferencing as well as just regular old conferencing. I kind of lump productivity in there with sort of the things that we do with Office 365 today, from collaboration and email, and mobility continues to be a very key part of all the things and all the direction that we're going. So just to sort of summarize and sort of close out on some of the things we're doing here in Ohio, I think it's important to note that it's really not about servers. It's not about hugging servers. It's not about being afraid to move into the cloud. It's really about the public good. I mean, what we're trying to do is get a baseline so that we can understand what our finances are and move in the direction that government needs to move in. And I think one of the key parts of that is showing progress and the results of that progress. And we can document about $120 to $150 million worth of savings, and that's from a cost side. I think if I could do some things over, I think I would measure the efficiency sides of that, which is not as easy to do, but certainly you can only go so far with the cost savings, and at some point in time that efficiency will get you. So a caveat, I would say, if you're starting these kind of processes today, I would think about how you could measure those efficiencies. And something that I'm not very good about, but I think is extremely important, is to celebrate the wins and the achievements and to crow a little bit about them. Very important, I think, for the workforce. Certainly, unfortunately, I have a tendency to get through that and then think about the next thing and maybe not take a breath and celebrate. My director always tells me, Stu, you've done good things, you need to celebrate, but I'm usually on to the next thing. The other thing, too, is I think recognizing the excellence that exists in the state IT workforce today. I mean, across the agencies, we have some great IT professionals in Ohio. They're doing a great job. We need to focus them on the right things and make sure that they're participating in these things that we do from an enterprise perspective, but also bringing that agency perspective as well and sort of weighing those two together. When we talked about the server migration, of which we started with 675 centrally managed servers to right now we're at about 5,500. We have about 1,000 more to go. Through virtualization, we got down to 6,500 servers, so got 1,000 more to go. But what we did was we worked with those agencies. We identified the gunslingers in those agencies, and we brought them to bear to work on the enterprise perspective. And, to remember that it's about the public good and it's about taxpayers' dollars, and to work that way. We also really focused on putting a plan together. I'm a big fan of plan the work and work the plan, but don't overthink it, don't overplan it, and you got to push from shore at some point in time. You're going to have to navigate those challenges as they arise. There's always going to be something unexpected that comes up, but you have to push from shore and you have to move. And as long as you have that plan and you're working that plan, everybody understands where you're headed and what you're doing, which kind of gets to the very last point, which is communicate. Make sure you're communicating at all levels with your business partners, with the agencies, with the IT staff, with the HR administrators, with the financial folks, the CFOs in the agencies. Make sure that you do that, because in my experience, communication leads to coordination that ends up resulting in collaboration, which is really what this is all about. So I appreciate the time, and thank you very much.
That's outstanding, Stu. I always love hearing the story of what you all have accomplished in Ohio and what you've seen, the results you've seen of this optimization. Really incredibly impressive and really something to be proud of. So that's outstanding. I want to remind our audience that you can submit questions for our amazing speakers like Stu Davis and the following speakers in the Q&A module at the bottom of your console there. So I want to switch gears a little bit. Let's go to Ohio's neighbor to the west. Dewand, you might be seeing something similar, or maybe even something a little different in Indiana. Tell us a little bit about that experience and what you've learned along the way.
Hey, thanks, Jake. So here in Indiana, we wanted to talk about kind of the roadmap to getting to those as-a-service type offerings and how a state can offer that in a cloud feel for its agencies and its consumers of that. And so as you're aware, and most of everyone that's heard me talk in the past, I typically like to talk about our specific analytics realm. That's our Management and Performance Hub. And what we've done to date on that has really been large-scale collaborative projects around analytics. And now it's time to really start thinking about what's the roadmap, what's it look like let's make analytics a part of every day. Let's make analytics part of one of our managed service offerings and make it consumable like your normal SaaS type or platform as a service. So that's what we're really putting together right now in Indiana, and I'm just going to cover briefly the roadmap we're using to kind of get there. So just a quick note in case someone has not had me speak about the Management Performance Hub, that is our analytics department, and that was created by our Governor Pence. And it started in our Office of Management and Budget, and it was created as another tool to hold Indiana accountable and basically make each agency within our state establish some form of key performance indicator, and then have a governing body hold them accountable to that key performance indicator and make those manageable and measurable. Before the introduction of our Management Performance Hub, those duties were left up to various individuals within the agencies who may or may not had guidance on it. So the KPIs were, to say the least, very manual in nature. They were not very consistent, and they weren't really measurable, especially if you're trying to compare partner agencies. If they're using different forms of KPIs, it's hard to see if they're on par with each other or not. And so the Management Performance Hub was a great step in the right direction of turning that into more automation, making it more data-rich, data-driven, and making it more consistent and measurable. Also before that, agencies typically worked with another agency here in our state called our Government Efficiency and Financial Planning Agency. What this agency was responsible for was there were assigned analysts that would work with each agency to help them create these KPIs and try to help them figure out a way to manage to those KPIs and work towards those KPIs. And so what we had today was this Government Efficiency Financial Planning Agency and our Management Performance Hub, and we thought, what's the next step to make analytics more, for lack of a better word, let's operationalize it, let's make it part of everyday Indiana business. And we came to the conclusion that the two agencies really just needed each other. If there's an agency that's already there to hold folks accountable and to help them to push forward in performance for services they provide to citizens, let's give them the tools or the data that we're working with Management Performance Hub into the hands of those analysts and let them be one with the charge. And so that's where the concept for the next part of our roadmap for analytics here in Indiana is to formally merge our Government Efficiency Financial Planning Office with our Management Performance Hub. And this is going to accomplish several key items for us. It will not only give the access to the data and the tools into the hands of those analysts that have seen both ways of how it was done before and how it can be done in a much faster, more information-rich environment, but it's also going to give the analytics world here in Indiana a spin. So since these was brought up in a kind of a project based out of IT as a way to solve a problem, now we're going to put a business spin on it and let the business drive the analytics for Indiana here. And that now we have business folks talking to other business folks and helping to change that mindset of how data can be used to solve everyday problems, and they don't hear it now coming from an IT staff. So that's one goal we're going to achieve with this merger, and then the other one is really just giving it the sustainability. We want this type of concept to exist well after Governor Pence, well after the current CIO here and me, and be ingrained in statute and just the way that Indiana does business from here on out. So merging it with this agency here is going to give it an official title and give it the sustainability and statute and the funding and access that it needs to maintain long after we're all gone here, which is another major important goal for that. And so next, to really bridge that gap now and make analytics more easily consumable for all of our agencies and to get them interested into it, is this concept now of analytics as a service. And how do we want to do that? Why do we want to do that? For the ones that have started to dive into these projects where you come to bringing different data sets together and the amount of science and cleanup that comes with it, they have realized that it's not an easy endeavor, and it takes a lot of time, resources, and quite a bit of dollars as well. And so some of your smaller agencies and folks that may want to take advantage of this aren't really interested in taking on an endeavor of that size. And so by creating sort of a platform as a service around analytics here. With our merger, we can make these services easier to consume for the agencies and break them off in smaller chunks, whether it's going to be a time-based project where it's just the number of hours needed to dig into data and to do work, or if it's going to be maybe a different project where that will involve multi-agencies that we can assist with some things we've solved already and just help bring down the level of risk, help bring down the cost, and just the overall time associated with these types of projects. So that will help to making it easier to consume, and that will also make it easier or more readily adoptable by agencies going forward. And one of the major steps that we're going to do to create this platform as a service around analytics is a concept that we're going to call the MPH Data Hub. And really what that hub is going to be is a scalable and efficient data mart, for lack of a better word, but it's going to be a data mart that's going to be available for those to consume sort of in a self-service type fashion. It'll just be up and available, so it'll remove the process of having to go and ask, what data do you have? I'm looking for this data. Can you give it to me? That kind of thing. We're going to work ahead, work ahead in the book, per se, to get the data out there and get it published already, and then just let the various parties go out and browse and consume the data as they wish and find those sets that apply to whatever problem is they're tackling or whatever effort they're trying to go after. And the data mart will have, in essence, 3 tiers that are controlled by security, and the access to those tiers is determined off of your sector. So obviously, anything within state of Indiana here and its agencies will be your tier that contains the most amount of information, the most amount of identifiable information as possible that's shared between the state agencies. But as we get out to wanting to work with maybe other state governments or local governments and even education and nonprofits, that data will obviously have to be aggregated and cleaned appropriately and then placed into that second level tier for that consumption. And we want to do that because we believe the true innovation really is broader than here just the state, than just at the state. So we're estimating right now that Indiana has about 750 data sets that have personally identifiable information that are in siloed fashion. And then we have about over 1,000 other data sets that have valuable information for research institutes and private sectors, but that don't have any personally identifiable information in it that would create kind of that buzz and give opportunities to spark and create lots of innovation out in the world outside of state government and force us to kind of think at a bigger picture. And what we really want to do is get the data out there and have it be actionable, and let others also turn that information into knowledge and then maybe transfer that knowledge into some data-informed policy. The next step the hub will be able to do for us is provide that next level of the self-service analytics that we would like to see. And so looking at those tiers again, you have what we want to focus on around public sector improvement, and then the projects will be available for those agencies or those education institutions or those nonprofits to partner together, share data openly, and look at ideas around public sector improvement and spawn new engagements or new as-a-service offerings from that. And then the last and final kind of most secure tier is the effort to increase the civic engagement from the outside. So your public sector, or not your public sector, I'm sorry, your private sector involvement to really push and drive innovation in areas that we may have not imagined before, or maybe areas we didn't have access to before. due to various NDAs or things like that. By us taking this step to offer the data up in a consumable format for that private sector, this may help kind of turn those relationships around and create a little more collaborative nature with sectors we may have never worked with in the past, and see new opportunities and maybe new reasons to kind of build a relationship going forward around the services of analytics. And with the hub and this tiered access kind of being our main kind of platform, cloud as a service entry point for the state of Indiana and other state governments. And that's our roadmap.
Great. Well, thanks, Dewand. Thanks for sharing your experiences here. It's been really exciting to see all of the work that you guys have done with the Management and Performance Hub, and even more exciting to see how other states have followed your and other states' lead in that area. So hopefully more will walk away with that valuable inspiration today as well. So we have some good questions flooding into our Q&A box here. I encourage you all to feel free to drop those in, and we'll go ahead and try to answer them at the end of the show. But in the meantime, I want to turn to Tony Encinias. Tony, you've seen a lot in this space, both in your role now at ViON and previously as Pennsylvania's CIO. I mean, do you want to tell us a little bit more about how states can really integrate smarter and innovate faster?
Absolutely, Jake. And I really want to commend both Stu and Dewand on the exciting things they're doing in Ohio and Indiana, respectively. These two states and these two CIOs are really on the cutting edge of providing innovation within their state, and the result is better services for the citizens. But as we all know, that innovation requires a lot of things to happen before you actually can make those great ideas come to fruition. And really, the innovation really boils down to is really getting the foundational infrastructure, obtaining that infrastructure the right way so you can get started in the right direction. And I think Stu kind of led to a little bit of what he was doing in Ohio. So just want to preface my talk on that. The first slide is, we're a cloud-based society. Think about it. As a society, we've been using cloud services for years. I would even submit decades. For example, electricity to power our homes. I mean, where does that come from, really? Does anybody even think about it? I mean, do we care? I mean, do we care what type of generators the power company is using? Do we care about, what type of turbines they're using to drive those generators? Do we care about what type of switching equipment is used? I can pretty much say with pretty good assurance for everybody on this call, the answer to that question is no. The same can be said for other public utilities we use on a daily basis, water, for example. I mean, I think all we care about is that the water is clean and available when we need it. And then there's natural gas, the same thing with that. And then, just recently, within the last 20 years or so, internet services. I mean, all we care about from an internet perspective is that it's available, fast, and reliable. I mean, I don't think about what type of servers and storage the ISP is using when I boot up my PC at home. I mean, these are all rhetorical questions, but really the answer is simply no. And then now think about what government has been doing over the last few years, and Ohio and Indiana are great examples of these. I would submit that government has been providing cloud services for its citizens for quite a long time now. I can now register my car and boat online. Citizens can apply for critical services like unemployment benefits, Medicare, WIC, and many more are becoming available every day. The point is, government has been providing these services in the cloud, and I would submit, that the average citizen doesn't care what servers, network, or storage the government is really using to provide those services. Multiple challenges in doing all this great stuff, all these innovative ideas, and I didn't say that this was an easy task or going to be easy for anybody by any stretch of the imagination. There are multiple areas of concern that need to be addressed as you move forward with your cloud strategy. And the first one I want to talk about is really SLAs. And in my opinion, this is the number one issue to address to get it right, especially if mission critical applications are involved. Cloud vendor viability. I mean, you really have to ask yourself, how long has a company been doing the cloud? What's their reputation? Is this an established company? What is their financial viability? Are they going to be able to provide you, from a financial perspective, the services that you're requesting? Usage metrics. This is huge. I mean, is there a way to understand how you're using the cloud? Is it a free-for-all? It can be a free-for-all. It's really not a buffet and all you can eat if you really think about it. In the cloud, you pay for what you eat and what you consume, and sometimes that gets lost until the monthly invoice comes, and then you kind of get a shocker, and then you just really need a way to understand and control the usage from your IT perspective. Multi-cloud integration. Can you and your vendor support public and private cloud integrations? Can you and your vendor support public and private cloud from different geographical locations? I mean, on-prem, off-prem, combination of the two. I mean, the hybrid cloud approach, at least from my perspective, is really where state government needs to go, because I don't think public cloud is the answer for everything, and I don't think private cloud is the answer for everything. So I think it's a combination of both. Legacy systems. Are your legacy applications conducted for cloud implementation? And what I mean by that, does the application architecture required to be an on-premise cloud? Can the application actually reside in a public cloud environment? You really have to take a look at those legacy applications, because either your answer is yes, and that's great, or no, what do I need to do? If you really want to put them in a public cloud, is it worth the investment to do that? Vendor locking. Can you terminate your relationships without excessive fees? I mean, can you enter an agreement with your vendor partner that if you decide at some point you want to move in a different direction? There's a lot of time and investment on both parties that go into a cloud implementation, and you really have to take a look at, from a contracting perspective, an SLA perspective, whether or not you can leave without any excessive fees, because that could be detrimental to your budget. What's the status of your data? What are they doing with your data? Are you locked in for an extended period of time? I mean, when you sign that contract, is it 5, 6, 10 years? Do you really want to get into a contract that kind of ties your hand for that period of time, especially as we all know how IT is dynamic? And do you have volume commitments? The whole purpose for the cloud is, I really don't know what my volume is going to be, and I don't really want to project my volume, because that's what got me into trouble the first time with traditional IT. I want to have the flexibility to really ramp up and ramp down without having any volume commitments to a specific vendor. Implementation risk. Is a vendor committed to doing this as a partner? To me, that's key. You really need a partner if you want to be successful in providing cloud environments. Does a vendor have experience and expertise in this area, or do you? You have to really seriously look at yourself in the mirror and say, does my organization have that expertise to really move in this direction? I mean, it takes 100% commitment on both sides to really make this thing work. Agility in deployment. Is the vendor responsive to your changes? I mean, we all live in a very, very dynamic world, which requires immediate responses to legislative requirements, federal requirements. I mean, the governor could come up with a new plan, and you really need to implement that on a short notice. Can your vendor provider really provide the responsiveness that you need to have that happen? Because you no longer have control of that infrastructure. Data security. How is the vendor ensuring your data is safe? I mean, you really have to think about that. Can the vendor support required policies like CGIS, CREA, IRS Pub 1075, HIPAA, et cetera? Those things really need to answer those questions, because if they cannot, then it really limits on what you can do in the cloud. What are the prevailing laws for a data breach? Have you thought about that? If your data is in the cloud and say it's in another state, does the state laws of where your data reside prevail, or does the state law of where the data originated from prevail? You really need to understand that question in case there's a data breach, because you really don't have much time to figure it out when it does happen. Let's see, next slide. Solving the IT challenge, or solving the cloud challenge. The left side of the slide is really what I call the traditional IT approach. It really captures capital. I mean, it's capital expenditures for hardware. I consider this budget unfriendly. Do the requirements to do every 4 or 5 years for a tech refresh. We all know it's hard to go to the well to ask for budget for a tech refresh. It really promotes unused capacity in both storage and server utilization and storage consumption. What I mean by that is that you don't want to go to the well more than once. So you try to project what you're going to need in the next 4 or 5 years, and you really project the capacity of that. And then once you obtain the funding for that, you procure it, but it really sits on your race floor for 1, 2, 3 years before you actually grow into it. It's not really a smart way to provide services. You need to finance the software support for that underutilized infrastructure. When the OEM maintenance ends, you need to finance third-party maintenance. That's very costly when the OEM maintenance ends. And what this really does is provides an endless pattern of continuous procurements. From a procurement standpoint, it's really hard to really, and that's why a lot of organizations have infrastructure that's 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, because it's very difficult to really, one, get the budget to really do the procurements to obtain new infrastructure. What I've personally supported for a number of years is the migration of traditional IT model to an operational expense model. And what are the benefits in doing this? One, to me, it's easier to predict, plan, and budget for budget submissions. It eliminates the CapEx budget request every 4 or 5 years. I only have to go to the well once. Costs are really generated usually by either the gigabyte or terabyte or CPU or core, and it's per month, per day. It's really a nice level set. I can actually predict my consumption, and then I know what my bill's going to be at every month, and I can realistically plan from a budget standpoint. You pay for what you use. To me, we pay for, again, my first slide was electricity and gas and internet. We pay for what we use. So when I turn the light on, my meter starts running. When I turn it off, the meter stops. So I really only pay for what I actually consume. To me, that's really a smart way to go about business when it comes from an infrastructure standpoint. Reduces wasteful accumulations of units, capacity, and servers and storage. I think that goes without saying. Reduces wasteful support of those capacity and the servers and storage. People forget about that. You have all that stuff on your raised floor that's not being used, but you're still paying the people to support it. You're still paying the vendor who provides you that, the software and the maintenance to take that for the help, for the care and feeding of that infrastructure. And it's really easy. It comes down to from an easier procurement with it being a one-time procurement. And what I really want to emphasize when you actually go down this path is really make sure you have no minimum commitments and no volume commitments, because to me that you don't want to get locked in to a specific level of infrastructure that you're going to require. And again, SLA based. What it really does is actually lets you determine the level of support based on the criticality of the application. So if you have 1 or 2 applications that really need 24/7, 365 bronze level support, you can actually segregate those out and piece those and get that support for that specific application. And then you can actually really maybe not have that level of support for your non-critical applications. Before you start down this journey of cloud, you really need to ask yourself, the right questions. Are you and your organization ready to embrace the cloud? I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. It's not a switch you can flick overnight. You really have to really think about it and strategize how you're going to approach this. What's the right mix of cloud between private and public clouds? You really need to do an analysis and say, okay, what applications are going to be conducive to public cloud operations, and then what are going to be conducive to private cloud operations? I mean, where is it? Do you want your cloud on-premise? Do you want it off-premise? Obviously, public cloud will be off-premise, or really, do you care? Do you care where those clouds are? Who's going to manage your cloud? Do you have the right skill sets to manage the cloud? Do you need the vendor to manage the cloud for you? What type of data do you want in the cloud? Are your stakeholders comfortable with an on-premise, private or public cloud implementation for their data? Those are fundamental questions that you have to ask. What's your cloud migration strategy? Are you thinking about big bang approach or small increments? Can you realistically do either? I mean, those things are really questions you really need to ask yourself. Governance. Governance is very hard. It's a topic that we kind of really don't talk about it much, but you really need to have governance when you actually go down the cloud path. All stakeholders need to support some form of governance to make this actually work. Top drivers for cloud adoption. This is not an inclusive list. If you take a look at this slide, you may have one or more that are listed on this slide. Maybe you have something different. I guess the question and the point is, what is your driver? What's your driver to go to the cloud? And you really have to stick with that, because that's really your fundamental, what I call, mission statement for going to the cloud is, why do you want to do this? And if you don't have one, you need to get one. So mapping your journey, how do I start doing this? Well, in my opinion, you need to start small. The old adage of crawl, walk, run actually applies here. Bite off little chunks of this huge and complicated elephant. Start, I can't overemphasize this enough, start with non-mission critical applications first. Start with an application or service that won't get you in the local paper if there's a significant outage affecting millions of citizens. You really don't want to start off with your Medicare entitlement program, trying to put that in a public cloud or private cloud, and it goes down for any significant time. It's not a good thing. Virtualization is a must. I think for the most part, state government has adopted virtualization over the last 4, 5, 6 years. So I think that's something that hopefully everybody's doing, because if you are a virtualized environment, it really makes migration to the cloud very, very, very easy. Make sure your vendor talks on specifics to how they will migrate, support, and manage your cloud environments. High-level and non-specific conversations, to me, are a red flag. You really need to understand how your cloud provider is going to help you and provide that. I mean, these high-level conversations really mean to me that I would need to do more research on the vendor and making sure that I'm comfortable in turning over pretty much, the keys to the kingdom of my environments and my applications to a vendor that's providing the services. Do a thorough assessment of your operations, not only physically, but really from an application perspective. The applications and their architecture are really key to this whole thing, to your success and really determination of how you're going to be able to approach this. Really, the point here is that your applications are going to tell you what you can, what you can't do when it comes to a cloud implementation, whether it's on-prem, off-prem, public, or private. So with that, Jake, I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
That's great, Tony. Thank you so much for sharing those best practices with us, and thanks again also to Dewand and Stu for their amazing presentations. Really, a lot of amazing content here today, and so I want to turn to some questions we've received here from our audience. And so we have a question from Laura here. Laura asks, what are you doing now in terms of mobility, and what are your future plans? So this question came in during Stu's presentation, so let's start with him.
Sure, that's no problem. We went through a mobile strategy exercise probably about a year ago and started to focus on platforms that could be leveraged to springboard mobile apps. We didn't want to get into a situation where we have mobile apps that we have to push out software patches and all that kind of things. We would rather do that at the platform level. So we're making progress there. There's a lot of interest from a state perspective and the agency perspective in particular to make sure that we mobilize some of the, even the front-end websites that we have today. So very much a key part of the direction that the state of Ohio is headed.
Great, Stu. And what about you, Dewand? Do you have any thoughts on mobility?
Yeah, Jake, absolutely. We've recently kind of taken on some in-house development for mobility, mainly around iOS programming. We always were encouraging our agencies, hey, when you're looking at modernizing or making a change, make sure you keep mobile in mind and working outside of the office. And, we constantly got pushback on, costs associated with mobile development and being able to find proper talent. So we decided to start building our kind of internal app folks, and it's been very, very successful as we're able to kind of help the agencies gather requirements when they're on the front end, and pick up some pretty easy projects for them and help them reach a mobile platform on an easier way to procure because they're coming through my office, and then also at a lot lower rate than what they can find outside.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. And I mean, Tony, do you have any advice or thoughts to add when it comes to crafting that mobility strategy, either from your perspective at ViON or from your past experience?
Well, I think from my past experience, I think if you don't have a cloud or a mobile-first strategy for your services that are providing services, citizens to your service, I think you really go down the wrong path. That's my personal opinion. I mean, if you look at it every day, I mean, people are constantly glued to their phones or their iPads or whatever the case may be, and I personally do most of my work via my iPhone. Whether it's buying stuff on Amazon or paying my bills or checking my flight schedule, whatever the case may be, that's really the future. And the citizens are expecting their government to provide their services the same way. I mean, the question is always, if Amazon can do it, why can't State X do this? Why can't I apply for my unemployment benefits while on my mobile phone? So, yeah, you really have to really focus on providing your services from a mobile perspective and really work down from that, because the days of standing in line are going away to going online to really retrieve these services.
Yeah, that's absolutely a really fantastic point. And we hear a lot in this space. Governors issuing the call to their states that they want they want interacting with government services to be as easy as checking the scores on your phone or buying something on Amazon. So that's a great point, Tony. So thanks for that. Another question from our audience. We have a question from Anthony. This one's directed towards Stu after his presentation here. It says. Stu, you talked about the importance of assembling the best team and recognizing excellence in employees. Up-to-date training is a great way to not only keep them happy but maximize their skills. How are you training those employees, Stu?
Sorry about that. It's a great question. And very, very important question, because you have sort of two groups that you want to move folks through and get them the appropriate training so that they continue to improve in their position. But in some cases, we're repurposing infrastructure folks to be more on the application side. So we've provided even BA training from an enterprise perspective. We have money that's been pulled aside every year that is to support enterprise training. We did that for Salesforce training. We've done that for Skillsoft, which is what we have as online IT training that's out there for the agencies. We've also brought in Microsoft Office 365 training so that even the basic user can go out there and learn more about how they can leverage Office 365. That training component, though, is very critical, especially as we move into this data analytics piece and understanding the tools that are at our fingertips. We have to make the investment to make sure that our workforce is getting the training that's required.
Great points. And Dewand, do you want to elaborate at all on training in Indiana and any work you've done there?
Yeah, we're definitely looking at the training, especially as a part of succession planning. That's becoming a big deal, and I'm sure it's a big deal in states like Ohio as well, where the talent that's been in the agency for a while is starting to reach the retirement age and move on. And so we've really looked at training not only from a job excitement, job satisfaction, but as a way to make sure we have enough knowledge base and sustainability to withstand as we start losing folks due to retirements. But some of the creative ways we've partnered here at the state with specific technologies that are new and emerging is working with a local nonprofit here called 1150 Academy, whose sole purpose is to kind of fill the gap of shortage of programmers that are out there, not only in Indiana but in the U.S. And so our not only here at our Office of Technology but also our Office of Workforce Development has partnered with them to kind of fill strategic spots, which helps to fulfill their mission and also helps to fulfill our mission.
Yeah, great points there. That's a really cool partnership there that looking forward to seeing more from that. Tony, any thoughts on IT training for employees?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all, the state government is, and I think everybody, even the private sector, are in competition with each other to hire and retain the best talent. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is, one, really do exciting things within your organization. Cloud first, mobile first, do things with analytics, big data, those type of things. Really having some exciting things that these kids that are coming out of college now really want to do. I mean, the kids don't want to really manage boxes and servers. They really want to do exciting things. So in order to do that, you really need to change your mentality, your culture, and that requires training. You have to train your staff on how to accommodate the goals and that you're setting forth, whether it's cloud or mobile or analytical, big data perspective. So if you don't have a true training plan, and succession is really key as well, as Dewand mentioned earlier, because every state, I would submit, at any point in time within the next 6 to 12 months, 40% on average could actually retire tomorrow. That's a big problem. So yeah, training is definitely key to ensuring the health of the workforce from an IT perspective in state and local government.
Yeah, absolutely. When I moderate these type of discussions, I often hear two things that almost every topic comes back to, and I think both of them have been mentioned here today. One is of course cybersecurity, and the other is exactly what you just mentioned, and that's that silver tsunami. This idea of all these folks retiring from the workforce and leaving us with a great gap to fill. So we've got time for, I think, one more question here today, and we're going to go to it here. And this is for all three of you. So let's go through. We'll start with Tony, though. Tony, in your presentation, actually, you talked about making sure that applications are conducive for cloud deployment. What exactly do you mean by that? And can you elaborate on that a little more?
I mean, like I said in my last statement, your applications are really going to dictate how far you can go into the cloud, how and whether it's an on-prem implementation, off-prem implementation, or a public cloud implementation or a hybrid. You really need to understand specifically your legacy applications, because everybody has to remember those legacy applications were developed before cloud was even in existence. And a lot of the things that are core to the code, hard-coded IP addresses, those type of things are really non-conducive to certain environments. Whether and latency is also an issue. So if you have an application in the private cloud off premise, and it's a web front interface to your mainframes, is the delay between the application and the mainframe, is it conducive to the application working? So you really have to do your due diligence. You really have to dissect those applications and figure out what can and what can't work before you start moving down any path of any cloud implementation, because again, that's truly going to tell you and dictate the direction you're going to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dewand, any thoughts on that, on some of the processes you've put in place as you're getting ready for the cloud and moving stuff to the cloud? I mean, how are you making some of your apps more conducive for deployment there?
Well, I think it starts with especially when you're looking at developing a new application, it starts with being involved early and being part of the kind of the initial requirements gathering, or the initial request for proposals on those types of applications. As the IT arm here, we need to make sure we give our partners and our agencies a very good boilerplate, if you will, a very good template that says, hey, here's our strategy. We're pushing for cloud first, and we need to design with these things in mind, whether it's security, whether it's flexibility, whether it's more mobile side or web-based. We need to make sure that those are part of each inquiry around the process of developing and writing and updating apps. So that's kind of our direction, to kind of give them what they need to push towards the cloud and make sure they're ready for the cloud when they look at and making any changes or choosing new directions to go for their business.
That's great points there. And Stu, thoughts on your end about making apps more conducive to cloud deployment?
Well, I guess I would do one of two things. I think through the virtualization process and the migration of servers, you have to understand a little bit more about that application environment and how it interacts with the operating system and all those kind of things. So that process is extremely helpful when we were going through the migration of the agencies moving their servers into the primary data center, making sure that was squared away. So that was a big plus for us out of the gate. But there's still, to Tony's point, you still have to do a significant amount of mapping to make sure that you're not going to cause any disruption when you're moving it into a cloud-based solution. We've also, we've moved to that mobile first. I think Tony hit that one, and of course Dewand hit it too. It's got to be mobile. It's got to be responsive to any device that might be out there. So understanding that as they go through a process to look at a cloud solution out there is going to be critical if they're building it, or if they're configuring a platform, or if they're actually building a whole bunch of customized software to make that happen. And generally speaking, with the state cloud and the position that the state of Ohio is in, we've been pretty much a cloud-first kind of discussion for about the last 2 years. I think right now we have about 80% in public or private cloud, one or the other, being even in a a private entity cloud behind their firewalls, and they manage the services and all of those kind of things. So it's not something that we're shy about. We work with the agencies on their application migrations. We're usually right there with them, joined at the hip in those processes. And I think it's been very conducive to collaboration and moving forward together.
That's great. Well, Stu, Dewand, Tony, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it there. Thanks so much for sharing some of these essential lessons that you and your organizations have learned.
Absolutely. I want to thank Dewand, personally thank Dewand and Stu for participating on this call. It was great.
And thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Tony. I just wanted to quickly say, the things that you did in Pennsylvania were pretty impressive as well.
Appreciate that, Stu. Learn from the best, you.
I agree. Thanks.
Sure
I'd like to be on here with two great guys.
All right, I want to thank our audience once again for tuning in today to StateScoop's Government Technology webinar series. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank ViON for sponsoring today's program. Just a reminder, our program today will be available on demand approximately 1 day after the webcast and remain available for up to 90 days. You can access it and download a PDF copy of the slides from the resource list here on the Council using the same audience link that was emailed to you earlier. Please, do invite your colleagues to tune in. It's free. All they need to do is fill out a brief registration card to view the entire program and get the slides. So look for more of our coverage on cloud innovation and all of our other state and local government coverage at statescoop.com. And on behalf of all of us here at StateScoop, this is Jake Williams. Thanks again for being with us.
Cool.